far as I'm concerned, it's the Catholics and the Jesuits who's got their fingers in every freaking pie of conspiracy out there, as far as I know. Really, I mean, it's the freaking Jesuits who's meddling with our cosmology and history and spirituality even. So and they have a big stake. But the thing is, they can't just come out. I mean, like, who owns all the freaking satellites or the not the satellites, the telescopes in the world? It's the Catholics. Aren't they the ones who own all the telescopes in the world?
Well, I don't know about all of them, but they have major telescopes. They actually have one in Antarctica called the Lucifer telescope, Notch. Believe it or not.
Yeah, I do believe
So,
it. I know
yeah.
that.
So the Catholics are in Antarctica, everybody, and they've been there for a long time. And well, come on. Who controlled academia? Let's just go by popular history and what they tell us. Even that, for the last 500 years, give or take, was the Jesuits, particularly in the Catholic Church, the Church of Rome. They were the power brokers. They were the keepers of knowledge. We know that they occulted the information through their mystery schools, and they basically kept the important things of this world hidden from the average person and amongst their elite circles. And when you study the religions and the doctrines and the beliefs of the elites, you have a very different understanding of this world.
This was told to me by a friend that is completely trustworthy, and this individual got it told by another friend, also trustworthy. And the other things we can, question whether they're true or not. Supposedly, that individual had met some most likely Jesuit priests. They could have been Benedictines or something, but my friend says most likely Jesuits, as remembered. And they were claiming, this was already 20 years ago, so they met this individual somewhere and they had a talk or something, and then they claimed literally that they've been, quote unquote, beyond the ice wall, and were kind of like, I'm not sure if they were laughing about it or something, but kind of like mentioning this. Doesn't mean that they really were, doesn't mean that this really exists, but I just found it very interesting that at least individuals that identify themselves as high-level priests, let's say, would claim such a thing.
Antarctica is surrounded in mystery. It's been surrounded in lore, mythology, and mystery for centuries now. I mean, I say this all the time. I mean, let's take modern history and the Industrial Revolution and what followed after that. Well, basically, we had the two world wars. So we had all these countries with these huge naval fleets and this amazing technical and engineering ability to travel to remote areas like Antarctica. And that's exactly what they did. The very first thing that the United States government did after World War II was not send the Navy home. They sent over 4,000 Navy men, led by one Admiral Richard E. Byrd, down to Antarctica for Operation High Jump. In 1946, they basically sent a naval fleet down there, a huge deployment to Antarctica. This was Admiral Byrd's fourth expedition to Antarctica, and it was the second expedition that was funded by the United States. So he ended up doing 5 total Antarctic expeditions. 3 of them were through the United States military. Now, so in 1946, the U.S. Navy goes down there. This was immediately subsequent to the Nazis throughout the lead up to World War II, so throughout the 1930s and even during the war, and their known presence in Antarctica. Also, following the war, World War II, where did all the Nazis end up? They ended up in South America, in Argentina and Chile, which is basically where you go when you want to go to Antarctica. That's where you go because that's the closest access point. So whatever's in Antarctica, we have to look at this. There's something to this Antarctica. Now, God, we can go so many places in our imagination and imagine it there. And while I'm on the Admiral Byrd thing, apparently in the lost diaries or the discovered diaries of Admiral Byrd, he tells a very detailed story where he was on one of his early expeditions, and Admiral Byrd was an aviator. Believe it or not, he was said to be the first person to reach the North Pole too, before he was doing his Antarctic trips in the 1920s. But anyway, he was aviating in Antarctica, and the story goes that his plane was taken over by some type of energy device. He was directed to land, and he landed in some type of advanced technical city. And he was introduced to humanoid beings and met their leader. So, can I corroborate this? No, of course not. But apparently, Admiral Byrd wrote about this experience, and his family knows about it. So, this idea of beings, advanced civilizations living either in Antarctica or, as you said, Raf, like beyond some ice wall, there's been many stories throughout the 1800s of these civilizations. So, how Richard Byrd is tied into all of this, the U.S. military, the National Socialist Party, and then previous generations, like in the 1800s. Is it possible that there's openings, passages that maybe open during the Antarctic summer? There's so many ways to go with this. What we do know is there's no independent exploration allowed. You have to go through trips like this Antarctic expedition and others if you want to get down there. So, yeah, it's fascinating. Stories of pyramids in Antarctica. Is it possible that there's some cyclical cataclysmic event that happens where the inhabitable land on Earth like changes and migrates in some way? Does the sun migrate across some great plane? Doesn't have to be an infinite plane, but there's theories of that the precession of the equinox is actually the precession of the sun itself and the moon and the heavens above the Earth. So the idea would be that Antarctica at one time may have been inhabitable, and for whatever reason, as the sun migrated, well, so did the civilization. Also, the fact that Antarctica averages about 8,000 feet above sea level. It's like a big plateau. And there's higher parts, there's huge mountains there, but the average height above sea level is at like 7,000 to 8,000 feet, which is over a mile, well over a mile high. So it just, to me, it strains credibility to think that there's this really high altitude land that exists on the bottom of the globe. Like, it's just weird to me that there's this like continent on the bottom, perfectly situated on the South Pole, with this really high land. Like, it's just, and it's kind of like round. What other continent is like kind of like round and perfectly situated so that, that it's like right on and that it's so high? What makes more sense, that or that you would have this high land to contain the oceans, just like the walls of a pool would contain the water in the pool, or how a lake would have to contain the water inside of it? That seems more intuitive to me. That doesn't prove a flat Earth, or disprove a globe, but it's just kind of like strange to think about it. Like, that doesn't quite just fit to me. That's weird. So 8,000 feet above sea level, it just sits there on the bottom, and then you tell us we can't go there when there shouldn't be a problem. So if in the Antarctic summer, we have all these expeditions down there and people are living down there for months at a time, well, why can't we send expeditions down there, whether it's privately funded or otherwise? I mean, how many people die on Mount Everest each year? They don't have a problem letting people go up there. They can't even take the bodies down from Everest. They're just dead bodies strewn across the thing. Nobody's stopping people from going to Everest. Nobody apparently cares about the ecosystem on this beautiful Mount Everest, as everybody just leaves their trash up there, including dead bodies, and they're just crapping all over the mountain and all over the landscape. But yet you have this entire huge Antarctica that's apparently is, as Admiral Byrd said, bigger than the Americas. But nobody can go there without governmental approval. See, that's the part that I think people need to question is like you said, it's like, why are people so focused on, having somebody go down there in this specific place set up to observe a specific thing? Isn't the greater issue that we're prevented from exploring this region, doing observations, doing experiments? Like, that's the real question that I can't get my mind around. So no matter what, this mystery and the intrigue around Antarctica, that's going to be pervasive. That's not going to go away. I don't care how many like trips and little Union Glacier bases they can have. That means nothing to me. Until people can go there and explore, this is always going to be an issue, for me at least. It's hard not to, imagine what could be down there, because there's so many theories. It could be, I mean, a lot of people think that there's a literal hard barrier, like where there's a dome that comes down, and where you could like physically see, the base of this dome where it meets the earth. Interestingly enough, there's an Encyclopedia Britannica from 1958,
Right.
and it references a dome at 13,000 feet, which is really low, relatively speaking. And apparently this was and you could still find it in the Encyclopedia Britannica, 1958, which is, the year NASA was formed and 1 year before the Antarctic Treaty was signed. Because, like I said, post World War II, there was a lot of activity. So in 1946, as I mentioned previously, Admiral Byrd went there with high jump. But then 9 years later, in 1955, he went back again, but this time it was a multinational expedition. It wasn't just the U.S., it was the U.S. and its allies. And that was Operation Deep Freeze. So in 55, he went down for his final expedition, and he died a few years later. But then, like I said, after that, so after they do an international expedition in 55, within years, there's a treaty, and then NASA's formed, and they close Antarctica off to the public. So there's something here with this whole thing. Again, regardless of Earth shape, this Antarctica thing is completely intriguing in so many ways. Now, again, ice, domes and things like that, I don't know, but it is kind of fascinating that would be placed in an encyclopedia. Followed by that, for people who might be new to this subject, there was an Operation Fishbowl, which took place in the early 1960s, where they apparently used ballistic missiles to map out the so-called firmament. Now, again, this is lore, and this is, theory, called conspiracy theory, but you can look into it. It's Operation Fishbowl or Operation Dominique. So post-World War II, there seemed to have been a lot of attention regarding, the exploration of this world, what it may be. Certainly, they weren't just buying a globe. I often question, what do the people in these top military and political leadership positions know? What are they aware of? Because it's easy for us to say, well, they all know the truth, and they're just hiding it from us. Well, yeah, maybe, or maybe they don't even know what the truth is, or maybe there's only very few people at the top of this so-called capstone. But either way, I don't think even the government was accepting a globe, even in modern history. I can't imagine that, like when the Allied forces and the
especially if it is contingent on technical capabilities, they could not afford to run on a wrong model.
Right. Well, but again, look, when you look at pictures from World War II, the maps that they were using an AE map. Basically, they're using Gleason's map to navigate. Right, Raph? So if they're going to Antarctica and they're sending these vast naval fleets all around the world, and they're using the AE map to navigate, I mean, doesn't that say it all right there? I'll tell you what they weren't doing. They didn't have a big globe.
And in terms of your question, Z, about the capstone, what I like the most here is Hanlon's razor, which maybe you may be familiar with, which often is misquoted as saying, never attribute to malice what can also be explained by stupidity. But that's like the short form, I think, misleading version of it. The real version is never attribute to malice what can be properly explained by moderately rational individuals following incentives in the complex system. And I think by that we have like a natural hierarchy together with need to know. And that's, I think, how some of these things can be mapped out, at least theoretically, and also at least confirmed from the very little, accounts that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's how I like to think of the way things operate. I've seen it with my own eyes, because all it really takes is the person, just if they're accepting a fundamental premise and they're operating from that premise, and that premise is reinforced through these various governmental and business organizations, well, then even a rational person can come to a faulty conclusion because their starting point was flawed. For instance, if your starting point is, well, humans evolved over billions of years, and we live in the vastness of space and things like that. Well, if you have that as the fundamental building block of your thought processes, then even by using sound reason and logic, you'll conclude things like, oh, well, let's say the jab mandates were appropriate. Or if you have that same understanding, then you can rationally come to the conclusion that, well, of course we went to the moon. And of course the Earth is a globe, because there's a fundamental building block that is based on a belief system. Now, if that belief system can be falsified, then one can start with a new premise, and then they can use logic to build from there. And that's why I think so many things come down to beliefs and presupposition. So exactly. So you have all these doctors, you have all these politicians, it could be the president. If the president believes certain things, it's entirely plausible that he can be completely out of the loop with everything, and that there's a whole system that actually runs things below the surface or behind the scenes that even the president's not even aware of. And that's how deep some of this deception can go.
One may think what they will of, what's his name, Greer? Stephen Greer, the emergency doctor who's gone, let's say, full contact alien. There's can be many things can be discussed about it, but even he mentions, at least regarding the UFO topic, he supposedly, or at least as the publicized information, has spoken with certain former presidents, I believe even Clinton or whoever, and they basically all told him more or less, yeah, it's restricted access. I can't just become president and know about the UFO file. And even that's public information. So then it's like kind of obvious, how should I say, that just what you're mentioning is happening with many other topics, and they are most likely also all related in some strange fashion.
Yeah. Well, let's think of it. I mean, if this really is a conscious reality, a spiritual reality, well, that's all you need to know right there. Because once that's basically considered in the conversation, well, then we get kicked outside of the bookends of this materialistic understanding that many people have in modern society. So, well, if we're looking at other entities, other forces that are kind of moving things in this reality, it completely makes sense. There's so much in this culture that drives us towards a particular mindset, a secular mindset, a materialistic mindset, that even many people who are very intelligent or even very aware and conscious of certain things, they'll even be entrapped in this certain type of paradigm.
Oh yeah.
Because unconsciously we're embracing the scientific paradigm that's been presented to us through indoctrination and conditioning. I pulled this from a documentary, an old documentary on Admiral Byrd, and there's a quote at the end of this documentary, and I find it to be some type of insightful key into Admiral Byrd's mindset regarding Antarctica, and it seems as though he encoded something in this.
In 1955, 2 years before his death, Admiral Richard Byrd departs on his 5th and last expedition. But it's not simply an unknown continent or a distant ocean that lures adventurers like Richard Byrd. As he put it,
all right, listen very closely to what Richard Byrd said, because they said, as he put it.
Here is a door ajar through which one may escape from the noise and chaos of civilization into the solace and harmony of the cosmos, and for a moment be part of it.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah, but okay, so how much, legitimacy is there to this claim? Because like Byrd, wasn't he a Freemason, or he belonged to some kind of secret society, and he is an
I'm
admiral, so he
sure.
worked for the military. So like I question, because like there's that other interview when he was on TV, and it's like, oh, there's vast amount of land that is the size of America, like beyond Antarctica, and there's so much resources over there, and if people just understood. Have you seen that? Most everybody have seen that, right?
Yeah, I actually have that here. It's in this video. So Notch, not only was he connected, his brother was a United States senator from Virginia, and also was the one-time Virginia governor. So his brother was big time into politics, and he's descendant from the original colonizers. And what was the one who married Pocahontas? Smith, his name was, or whatever his name was. So this guy has connections back to like the Mayflower, and was obviously connected in all their secret societies. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. So again, then it's kind of hard to trust, and because like back in the day though too, like they talked about how some scientists came out and said that the moon is plasma and blah blah blah. Like like how much credence can we put on these people and what they say? And we know that they mix truth and lies together. So maybe there's some amount of it. I mean, if he said that is a door that is ajar to another reality, and everybody's like, oh yeah, sounds really great, but how will we ever know? And Dave Weiss also talked about how like these like random cargo ships, they're going into like middle of Antarctica as well, and there's some random island that they are parked, and then they like veer off into like Antarctica, like into the nowhere, like in the middle of Antarctica. So that's also really freaking funny. Like they're like collecting or trading and have resources that is being sent to some off-world civilization. you know
Yeah, that's wild. He calls the island Carabas. It's so weird to think about. And then Dave, he always talks about the Iron Republic. There's also a book called The Navigator Beyond the Ice Wall, another one called The Smoky God. So a lot of stories from the 1800s about these outer lands, whatever they may be. So completely wild. But I would agree with like what you said about like Admiral Byrd and stuff, because he was obviously from some elite wealthy family who was connected, because he was doing multiple privately funded expeditions before he ever was part of the U.S. Military expeditions. He went to the North Pole twice, and then he was in Antarctica on 2 private expeditions before his military career.